And we're live. It is Thursday, the 11th of September, the year of our Lord 2025, which makes it the 14th anniversary of the September 11th attacks, which would have happened, sometime after 9 o'clock in the morning, so about an hour from now. Um, it is 8 a.m. in Washington. I take it it's around 2 p.m. in Stockholm.
Yes.
And you know, Russia is attacking Poland and pretending it's all a big accident, and it's just shocking that anybody would think that 15 drones or whatever intentionally showed up in Polish airspace and destroying Polish houses. And we're gonna talk about that today because it feels like it disappeared from the news, at least on this side of the Atlantic, rather quickly, thanks to the murder of Charlie Kirk, and was probably going to disappear quickly anyway because we have the attention span of a small puppy in this country. But look, it is, I'm going to actually keep the monologue very short this morning because I want to have as much time as possible to talk about this. Um, so, look, the sun is shining, the birds are chirping. It's going to be a great freaking day, and you are watching Dog Shirt TV. And it is a goddamn revolution in morning television, and one of the revolutionary features, of which there are many, is that, sometimes we stick with our regularly scheduled programming. And even though um, Charlie Kirk has been murdered and the entire country is consumed with talking about it, we're not going to talk about it today. We may talk about it tomorrow, but today we're going to stick with our regularly scheduled program, which is about an actually highly important geopolitical event, an attack on a NATO country, and the apparent inability of the Trump administration, at least so far that I've seen, to say anything useful or constructive about it. And another one of the revolutionary features, because as I say, there are many, is that Charlie Kirk will still be dead tomorrow, and we will be able to have a conversation about, maybe we'll even know something about who the shooter is by then. And so, one of the things about being dead, as Chevy Chase used to remind us on Weekend Update, is that it doesn't change. That's one of those static conditions. So, all of which is a comparatively short winded way of saying that we're not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have very predictable Russian attacks that, in fact, we predicted. The Poland oops scenario was one of the scenarios that I think Minna and Nastya and I talked about as how do you test NATO in the Trump era. And so we were talking about a Lithuania Kaliningrad scenario, a Narva scenario, a Finland scenario, and a Poland oops scenario. And Vladimir Putin, who
Always
is
listens to Dog Shirt TV.
always watches Dog Shirt TV every day. That's and listened and said, I prefer the Poland oops scenario because it has more plausible deniability. So Minna, let's start with uh, were you in any sense surprised by this uh, turn of events?
No, not really, I
We
have to say.
literally discussed it on the show.
Yeah, I remember that discussion well. And I think I was sort of skeptical whether this would be a very good thing for Russia to do. But I remember that, or I think I remember, this might be a false memory. I don't hope so, but um, I think we discussed it that it would depend on how much of like the number of drones and how thick Russia would lay it on, sort of like whether it would make sense to do this in Poland or not. No, I don't think that anybody was really surprised because this has been basically happening on a smaller scale for a long time, basically throughout the whole full-scale war. Um, and I think what was interesting to an extent was maybe the timing. I was wondering because Russia tends to like to add some kind of symbolic twist to things. So I was wondering whether it was intentional that it happened in the night before Ursula von der Leyen, the EU Commission president, was due to give her State of the European Union speech in the morning. And it was basically still unfolding the whole situation while she was speaking. So I was just wondering whether that had anything to do with it. I mean, it doesn't matter in the end, but I thought it was interesting, however, because like as you mentioned, it offers some possibilities to exploit in terms of implausible deniability, but Russia didn't really go for it all that much. So I thought that the Russian reactions were pretty interesting yesterday because like at first they didn't say much, then they said that they never had any intention to attack Poland, but
Right,
they
which is
but
raises the question of what the intention was.
yeah, but then they also didn't sort of completely deny that the drones were nevertheless directed into Poland. And then after that, I think they sort of went for demanding evidence that it was actually Russian drones. Um, which is kind of funny in the sequence of first saying we had no intention of attacking Poland, and then sort of demanding the evidence afterwards. So I don't know. It was just interesting. But all in all, I would say, and there were enough statements to the effect that it's very hard to imagine that this wouldn't have been deliberate. It was at least, the Polish foreign minister, the German defense minister, and a number of experts. I mean, there was some discussion about how inaccurate these type of drones can be and whatever. But I think the consensus formed pretty quickly that this is very unlikely an accident or some kind of sort of whoopsie straying. And I would say, actually, now that I've given this some thought and looked at what the reaction was in the end, it looks most likely that Russia really just wanted to see what are Europeans gonna do? Like, what's their reaction time and, I don't know, style, if the Americans are, as was expected, going to just sit on their hands. Um, and actually, it worked fairly well in the sense that the European NATO members present in Poland, so it was the Dutch who had been deployed to Poland on this like forward presence deployment just a week before or something, and then an Italian AWAC, I think it was. So they actually did what they were meant to do. So how, like, what the whole idea of these forward deployments is. The Dutch seem to even have been a little faster than the Poles, and although they took off from the same base, and they managed to shoot down some more than the Poles, which probably leads to some discussions among the or in the Polish Air Force. But anyways, that was sort of like interesting that it actually worked the way it's intended, also without the Americans. So I would say that this is sort of reassuring for Europeans in the sense that clearly, at least in a limited contingency such as this one, we are able to operate without the Americans. On the other hand, for the Russians, this should be somewhat discouraging in the sense that I'm not sure that they expected a reaction necessarily. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see whether they repeat the test in some near future.
So let's talk about that.
Hmm.
So I looking at it from a Russian point of view, I would say they got a pretty predictably weak reaction from the Trump administration. I think Trump tweeted, "Here we go,"
Yeah, nobody
which
knows
is,
what he means.
well,
World War
it's a,
Three?
yeah, here dancing. What's you know, uh,
No,
I
that
don't
was
know.
weird
Here
even by his standards.
it was weird even by his standards. And so and there certainly has been, I suppose Matt Whitaker, the NATO ambassador, said the right thing. Um, but Matt Whitaker is not the president of the United States, and so when the president of the United States says, "Here we go," and the NATO ambassador says, all NATO territory is sacred or whatever. I don't remember exactly what words he used. You gotta go with the president as reflecting thinking. European military reaction was pretty good, as you say. Um, on the other hand, and the political reaction I thought was very good. Everybody except Trump said all the right things.
Hmm.
Um, and if I were Putin, I would have a little fear in my hearts of the Polish military. It's large, it's fairly technically advanced, and he's already bogged down in Ukraine. So, in your view, why is the optimistic scenario that, hey, this um, may make Trump look as silly as he already looks, or even sillier, but it's actually not a successful test from Putin's standpoint? What's wrong with that thesis as a working understanding of what happened?
I don't think anything's wrong with that. I really agree with that because I think from a Russian perspective, what should be discouraging in all this is that not only did the Poles now react, um, I mean, this was the first time that something was shut down, but also their European allies were in on it and contributing, and this whole sort of reaction, multinational reaction, worked very well in that sense. I think that you can maybe put it down. I mean, like a lot of people have been saying, like, and it actually is a pity that Nastya isn't here because she was texting me like, "Are you serious? Like, you got 19 drones and you shut down only 4 of them? Like, what is this ratio?" Um, so yeah, there's definitely a point to be made about, first of all, that not all of the drones were shut down, and second, about the cost inefficiency ratio of using high-tech equipment like F-35s to counter drones. I have 2 arguments that I've heard on this, so I can get back to that.
And
But
just for those who aren't read in on weapon systems, the F-35 is a really, really bespoke, expensive platform. And so if you're tying up F-35 time shooting down $10,000 drones laden with explosives, that is a
they weren't even laden with explosives, most of them, as far as I've understood.
okay. But
Yeah,
even if they were,
yeah.
right? That is deploying an immense, powerful, expensive weapon system against basically flying toys.
Yeah. So what I find interesting here is that first of all, the drones mostly seem to have been either ISR or decoys. So not with at least much payload, most of them, which also then again makes it even less likely that this was unintentional. Because why specifically send like a number of drones that you have to react to some way in some way, but without explosive payloads, so that then there's sort of this, it really reeks of a test in that sense.
Right, right.
And
And the other reason to assume it's a test rather than a mistake of some sort, is that this is really exactly the test that we hypothesized,
Yeah,
right? I'm not,
and not
and
only we. Yeah.
I don't mean we in the sense of you and I, though
What?
we did, though we did, but like anybody who was seriously thinking about, particularly after the drone crash, the Ukrainian anti-aircraft crash in 2022 in Poland, that anybody who was thinking about how this is going to play out was thinking about this exact scenario. And
Yeah.
so the comportment of it with theory uh, does, I know that's not evidence, but it does give me confidence in the theory.
Yeah, for sure. So then, if we look at sort of the escalation management side of things. So on the Russian side, it was clearly sort of, it was meant as not a declaration of war on NATO, but as this kind of test of what is the European reaction if we assume, and rightly so, that the US is gonna sit it out. And then on the other hand, I don't know why not all of the drones were shot down. Perhaps they just didn't want to use all of that expensive ammunition. I've also heard like two things about this, because what I was a little bit like confused about was why Poland doesn't have anti-drone units, even in peacetime, exactly for this kind of a contingency. I heard some arguments that it would be simply too expensive because they would need so many of those at all times. I don't know. I don't really I haven't done the math myself, so can't assess that. It feels to me like there should be some kind of lower level anti-drone capability or capacity like available also in peacetime, exactly for this kind of contingencies. On the other hand, what I heard was that this was great because it was basically an awesome exercise for the pilots. Plus, the Dutch F-35 pilots got a little bit of payback for MH17, and that they just like that this was actually good use of ammunition, sort of exercising on live targets. I don't know.
Hey,
I mean, like you can,
exercises are good.
yeah,
Reminding people that these particular, pardon me, particularly reminding European militaries that sometimes you have to use them
yeah,
is really good. The Finns don't need that reminder, but you know, Dutch do, and Germans really do, as you don't need me to tell you. And having enough incursion that Western Europe gets the occasional reminder of what Eastern Europe doesn't need reminders of,
mm,
is, I don't think that's an unhealthy thing, which is not to endorse what Russia did. Um, Here's a regional geopolitics question for you that I don't know the answer to, and I'm curious if you have thoughts on it. So, I on a hunch yesterday, I looked at a map, which I try to do every now and then to remind myself, how close together European countries are. And Poland and Russia actually don't have a border other than the Kaliningrad, uh, whatever it is, pocket, enclave, oblast. Um, and in order to fly a bunch of Russian drones into Polish airspace, you do have to fly them over a whole lot of Belarusian territory.
yeah.
And I am curious whether Poland has the leverage militarily and politically to say to Lukashenko, you know, we're holding you responsible for any future such incursion. Don't ever let this happen again. What do we know about the Belarusian politics of this?
So that's a really interesting question because one interesting part of the Russian side of responses or reactions to this was that Belarus was talking about these drones having gone astray due to electronic warfare. And they have publicly stated that they warned Poland that there were drones incoming. And the Poles have, as far as I know, also confirmed this. And that they were in contact with both Lithuania and Poland about these drones. And that they shut down some of them. That's what the Belarusians claim. So it's very interesting in a way how Belarus is like sort of trying to portray itself as this kind of, look, I'm just helping out my neighbors kind of guy. Although obviously these came through, at least through, if not from Belarusian territory. I don't right now have information on whether they were actually coming from Belarusian territory or just like flying
Right.
over it. So
Hence, John Hawkinson, we don't know the answer to that question,
yeah, I would
but
have to.
it would be a good while. I mean, when Kiev is under attack, I get texts from Nastya 2 hours before any impact is expected, because they're pretty slow moving, at least with glide bombs, with the
Mm.
or with the drones. They're slow moving, and they're not stealthy at all. And so, if you depends where you take them off. If you take them off in Belarus, but if you launch them over Belarus, if you launch them from Russia and fly them over Belarus, that's going to be like, you know, more than an hour of transit
Yeah,
time.
it's gonna take some time. Yeah, exactly. So that is interesting, sort of what kind of a game is Belarus trying to play here? Because until 2020, when Lukashenko sort of got completely taken over by Russia, Belarus had been pretty good at playing sort of both sides. They were trying to balance the whole Russia relationship with like some outreach to the EU. They were part of the Eastern Partnership Program, and I mean, obviously, it never went as far with the EU for Belarus as it did with, for example, Ukraine or Georgia or something, or Moldova. But nevertheless, Belarus was sort of like in the game and playing both sides. And then it was really the 2020 elections after which Belarus got sort of completely taken over by Russia and became this full-scale proxy. So we can assume that Lukashenko is eager to use any and every opportunity that presents itself to sort of signal some distance again. I think that he would like to get it back into some kind of, yeah, like a more independent position.
Right,
So
but he's a little constrained in that regard.
indeed, he is a little constrained.
So,
But
since we find ourselves talking about Belarus, I have just texted Katerina Shmatsina to
oh,
see
great.
if she wants to join us, because she knows a lot about Belarusian politics.
Yeah, she
I
would
have
be
no
great.
idea if she is awake, but maybe she'll pop up on screen.
Anyways, we have to have her on the show sometime soon so that we can get answers to these Belarus questions.
Indeed. Um, all right, so let's talk about um, what Putin's dream scenario was here. Um, he got, I think, the response that he wanted from the Trump administration. And by the way, on the timing, I think the timing has less to do with van der Leyen than with Alaska, which is you want a reaction. You want to show within a brief period of time of Alaska that you really do own Trump
Mm.
and that Trump will not do anything for NATO. But you don't want to do it so close, like a day after Alaska, you bomb Kiev and kill some kids, right? But you want to wait enough so that it will not be obvious to people who like Trump that
Mm.
you're punking him. Only obvious to people who are, everybody else. Obvious to Europeans, obvious to Americans who are appalled, but not obvious to the MAGA base or to people who are looking for uh, good, looking to support the administration, that this is. So what do you wait? You wait 2 weeks, right? And enough time that the American attention span has moved on, but not enough time so that people like us don't know that this is Alaska fallout.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm sure it has to do with that, and then the specific day in the specific week can have been chosen because it's just a nice touch, sort of. You
Right.
maybe don't want to choose 9/11, so you go for the day before, and as it happens, von der Leyen is also going to give a speech on the State of the European Union. I think that it was indeed very predictable, but also hopefully eye-opening, because the problem, especially like 6 months ago, let's say, was that because the military to military relations between Europeans and Americans have been very close and very good, and even intensified a lot in the last couple of years. And then there wasn't any immediate sort of cut in exercise cooperation or other sort of like military to military cooperation after Trump came to power. So there was a lot of, especially European like generals and others, who were like really upset about the suggestions that America would have now abandoned us, because they didn't see it sort of in their day-to-day operations. And they really kept going on about no, like America stays and remains solid and all that. And I think this is important in the sense that now they've seen that America is only as solid as the politics is, because now clearly the Americans in Europe, they didn't dare to like react in any way that they thought might in some way annoy the White House or something. So it should be clear to everybody now that in this kind of situation, I mean, it's actually funny. Like there was some kind of a White House statement on how they are sort of in consultation with allies and following the situation, and like don't see any measures to be or assess any measures to be like necessary right now. It was like such a Scholzian thing to say. Like it was exactly like what you would have had from Berlin like a
Right,
year
right.
ago. So that was really telling. And then I would say that for Russians, that was sort of like, yeah, they can be pretty happy now with how they pocketed Trump and the US and how that has happened. But I think I spoke about this at some point on Darkshire TV. That
Hey, hey, hey.
is it a
Sorry, the,
doggy?
the dog is grabbing things. I'm going to
Oh,
mute
oh,
myself for a
doggy.
second.
Is doggy gonna say hi?
She's too big now to be
Oh,
picked up and
hmm,
held up on the screen, but
that's too bad.
she says hi by grabbing things and gnawing through cables and stuff.
Oh, so if you cut off, we know who's the culprit. It's not Russia. It's just the dog.
Exactly.
All right. Anyways, but like what I was at some point talking about, I think also here on Doctor TV, is that actually when you think about it from the Russian point of view, it was better for them to have a weak Europe dependent on the US, and then always this like big existential anxiety about whether or not the US would really um, come true in case it's needed. Whereas it's worse for Russia to have a Europe that is willing to act and capable to do so even without the Americans. And I mean, of course, this was a very, very, very minor thing. Obviously, any European nation is going to be able to like do this by themselves. Okay, maybe not the Balts; they will need help from others because of lack of air forces. But anyways, but I'm just like thinking that actually for Russia, it's not super great to have a capable Europe right next door who necessarily won't wait for the US to lead or something. So in that sense, this was a very interesting precedent.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Look, the ultimate objective would be a Europe that can defend itself and an American security guarantee, so that you have a very light US footprint that has as much deterrent punch as a heavy US footprint. And I do think the one aspect of Trump's bullshit about Europe that is true is that the burden sharing over the last 30 years has gotten very warped, and Europe needs to think that through. And so I do think um the the side of this that is European self-help is great. The problem is, as you say, that the event is very small, and the ability to handle small events and the ability to handle big events are not the same thing. And, you know, Putin might take the message from this that if you send over a whole bunch of unarmed um, drones and they take out 4 of 12 of them, that means if you send 200, which is what he sends to Kiev on a semi-regular basis, and they're armed, and, you know, the United States won't do anything, and Europe's capacity to deal with that is limited. Now, I don't know if he's looking for a war with Poland right now. I don't, as I say, I actually don't think he could handle that. But I do think that there is risk that he will take from this the idea that Europe can handle small scale contingencies um, uh, with minimal consequences, but it's not in a position to deal with something major.
On the other hand, it would be really hard for Russia to go for more than this without then actually risking a war. Because if it
Yes, I
had been
agree with that.
200, and then you, like, even if they had been like with virtually no payload, like you would have had some much more critical damage in Poland, and then that would have been a very different situation. So if it's just sort of, I mean, one thing that has been floated as a potential aim here for Russia is that now Europeans will divert more of their air defense back home and give Ukraine less, which is of course like a possibility maybe. But yeah, so I think that there's like, because the risks then start really growing for Russia too, like if they go for more than this.
Right. Russia is not in a position to have a war with Europe right now.
Yeah.
Um, and I will tell you a funny story about the Polish foreign minister, Radek Sikorski. Radek is, among other things, the husband of Anne Applebaum, who was my very close colleague at the Washington Post. What do you have there, puppy? What did you catch?
Rogue puppy.
Yeah, the puppy is out of control and I need to rescue something from her. I'll be
Please.
right back.
Putting the dog into dog shirt TV. I can maybe address a question from Ante in the chat about what.
This is what she got.
Ooh, that
I have
looks.
no idea where she got it or why, but that had to be rescued from her.
Yeah,
So
he had to
Radek
be
and
rescued from that as well.
yeah, so Radek and I are sitting in his living room in front of a fire, and he is holding, this is probably 20 years ago when they were still living in Washington, and he's holding a giant brandy snifter and Roddick has, as a result of having taken political asylum in the UK, and I think he went to Oxford. He has this uh, inexpressible melange of Polish accent and British accent. It's a wonderful accent. He sounds like some Middle European diplomat of the mid-century. And one of the interesting things about Radek is, as a young man, after he took political asylum in Britain, he goes, and I'm not making this up, he goes to Afghanistan, ostensibly as a war correspondent, and actually joins the Mujahideen, fought with Ismail Khan's forces against the Soviets. So I'm sitting in his living room, and we're chatting, and I say to him, Radek, how did you end up in Afghanistan? And he looks at me like that was a stupid question, and he says, well, I couldn't very well fight the Russians in England, could I? Um, and so just want to point out that, like, this is the Polish government. The Russians are picking. This is now the foreign minister of Poland, and uh, uh, um, this is not a group of people, Donald Tusk and Radek Sikorski. This is not a group of people who are afraid of a fight. It's not like dealing with Olaf Scholz. And
No.
these are people who've been, in some part of their blood, they've assumed they have a fight coming with Russia since they were little kids.
Mm. And I think like one important point is also that Poland wasn't alone in this. As you emphasized, the political reactions were very good. They were very much on. They were swift and very much on message from other European countries. Macron was like visibly quite upset, and I don't know. I like my favorite scenario would be, since he's in such deep trouble domestically, that he would just now use the rest of his term to go sort of like dark Macron and just like do whatever. Because like he literally has nothing to lose anymore at this point. He's lost everything that you can lose, I think. Um, but yeah, I think that it was a good demonstration in that sense. That the Poles also probably didn't feel like they were completely left alone. And
Right.
actually, from the psychological point of view, that's actually incredibly important, especially in the case of Poland, because they have like some severe trust issues towards European countries, and that's for a good reason. Like, I mean, Poland has been partitioned like 3 times in history by their neighbors and others. So they don't have much reason to trust Germany and France either in those terms. And I think that that's why it was kind of great that it was exactly the Dutch, sort of like a small Western European, Northwestern European nation there, and they were very solid and they were useful. So I think that that was pretty good in those terms, that Poland now did get to see that Europeans actually stand with them this time, and that they matter, and that it was actually the Americans that didn't do anything.
Right, which of course that's going to be jarring to the Poles as well,
Yeah, for
because
sure.
they are um, Polish, whereas Polish European trust is at a deficit. Polish American trust has historically been very high.
Yeah.
So one country, what do we know about how it came to be that it was the Dutch that scrambled and did there's a bunch of countries in the region with air forces. Why was it the Dutch that, and not the Germans, any of
Mm.
the Nordic countries? What do we know anything about how the operation played out?
Yeah, so the reason that it was the Dutch just happened to be that they were on rotation in Poland. So they were on the spot. This is the what used to be called enhanced force presence. I think now it's just like forward deployment basically. So it was just their turn. I think last time the Dutch were there was in 2023, spring 2023. So it's not the first time that they were there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And then also what happened was that so Germany still has some Patriot units in Poland, which they offered back in 2022 to deploy to Poland, and they're still there. And they also got into high readiness, so they were also ready to shoot if there had been more incoming. Um, so it was team effort. As far as I understand, the Italian AWAC was also somehow just there, probably something to do with the NATO exercise schedule or something. I'm not entirely sure what was the deal with that, but so the more relevant thing was that it was the Dutch who were based right now in Poland.
And do we know anything about what U.S. force posture was? I mean, there was warning here. Were U.S. Forces asked to respond and didn't? Were they not asked? What do we know about what happened with U.S. forces?
So somebody can correct me if I'm wrong because I haven't double checked this, but as far as I know, the US is the framework nation in Poland for the forward land force there and or the forward deployment, and Poland shared all the information through NATO channels, so to all allies. So the US got all the same information as everybody else, and they, like, as far as I've understood, they chose not to do anything because they weren't sure what the White House is gonna think about this.
But they were not individually asked. Is that
Um, I can't imagine that they weren't, to be honest, but I don't have
interesting?
any like information on that. I think officially Poland stated that they requested or they sent the information and they sort of like um, consulted all allies through NATO channels. I can't imagine, like, especially because like the US is supposed to be in Poland. I can't imagine that the Poles wouldn't have directly been like, "Hey guys, here's the
Yeah,
situation."
so if I were Putin, that's a very important piece of information to me.
Mm.
Um, that the US is specifically asked and doesn't do anything, right?
But I think the bigger point here is that because, and I'm gonna just Google this in a minute to make sure that I'm not saying anything wrong, because, like, as far as I know, there hasn't been any change yet, and the US is still in Poland. Um, but the point is that basically all of this should be pretty automatic. Like, uh, the whole point is that you're not supposed to have to ask in a way, if you know what I mean.
Right, right. Although scrambling planes requires an order,
Mm,
right? And somebody has to, you know, that's a human process that is never entirely automatic.
that's also true.
And I would be somebody had to make a decision, let's not do anything. And I would be really curious what level that decision was made at. Was that a field thing on the let's let the Dutch handle this at, in Europe by people who are afraid of White House reaction? Is that a Pete Hegseth thing? Is that a Donald Trump thing? I don't think it was at the Trump level, but I'm curious, what's the point at which somebody decided we're going to sit this one out? If I were if I were a Pentagon reporter, I would be spending a lot of time on that question
Yeah.
this week.
So I was just double checking. This is a US Department of State fact sheet from January 20th. So I guess we can assume that it still um, applies.
Well, it
Um,
hasn't been taken down.
yeah, exactly. And it doesn't say that it's archived. So the United States leads the Enhanced Forward Presence battle group in Poland, and deploys a rotational armored brigade combat team under Operation Atlantic Resolve, funded through the European Deterrence Initiative. Currently, approximately 10,000 US personnel are on rotation in Poland.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be left to the Dutch is the relevant point.
Let's say that like what was also very sort of indicative in all this was basically that it took like 12 hours to convince Trump that he should even take a phone call from the Polish president. And there was a time when the US president would have been on the phone with the Poles like while this was unfolding during the night.
Right.
So
Right, and that time was
a year ago.
was in January.
Yeah.
This is something that any previous US president would have taken extremely seriously and would have sounded a lot more like Macron than Trump in terms of it wouldn't have been a single tweet that said, "Here we go." And that is a very dangerous development, though I agree with you that the European side is promising. All right, folks, we have about 15 minutes left, assuming the puppy does not chew through a cable. We can take questions, we can take comments, we can shift the entire conversation to Moomin trolls. Whatever is Auntie has a question.
Yeah, he asked
but
it earlier. I still have it in mind, so I can address that. Yeah.
So what was it?
It was about this decision that the US is now cutting funding for frontline states in Europe. And how bad is it? And my impression is, and this is mainly based on Estonian sources. I'm going to be visiting the other Latvia and Lithuania in the coming weeks and months, so I'm definitely going to like talk about it with colleagues there then as well. But right now, based on like what I've heard from Estonians, it's sort of like it's regrettable, but not the end of the world. Like it's been really important to have this funding in the past years, but it's sort of now very surprising that it's being cut in a way, and it doesn't mean some immediate sort of collapse or something. Actually, Antti, because you read Finnish, there was quite a good interview of the Estonian defense minister and other experts on the Finnish Yle, so I can recommend reading that for the Estonian assessment.
All right, and Kate asks about the timing with respect to the Polish presidential visit. What do we know about that? And Auntie, sorry your voice is gone. I did not I didn't think I knew about that, but feel better. The Polish presidential visit was what, about a week ago?
I have to admit that I didn't follow it so closely, like whether there was any particular. I mean, these days, if it goes sort of okay, like normal,
Right, we ignore it.
like normally in diplomatic terms, then you just sort of don't hear about it in a way.
Yeah, so I'm Googling it right now. Yeah, it's 7 days ago. The German Marshall Fund reports Polish President Ace's White House meeting, September 3rd, and the White House President Trump welcomes Polish President Karol Nawrocki, I never know how to do Polish pronunciation, to the White House, September 3rd. So, yeah, I think there's actually, as we contemplate the various factors that went into this timing, I like Kate's addition so it's 2 weeks after, or 2.5 weeks after Alaska, 1 week after the Polish president is here saying, don't think this guy can protect you. Um, and then the individual day has a quality of Ursula von der Leyen. Um, Joel,
Good morning,
how are you?
everybody. I'm okay. We've had some
Good.
dandy weather here in Minnesota, so that's going down pretty good. So I had posed a question where sort of I'd kind of heard a theory through the grapevine, and kind of was chatting on with the group on the side. Thought maybe I'd throw it to the two of you if you have a second for your consideration.
Of course.
I have heard that perhaps part of the thinking here is Putin believes he is facing some demographic problems inside of his country, where he's not going to have a large enough population of warfighting age people to use the traditional Russian warfighting doctrine of quantity has a quality all of its own. And if he can get his defensible perimeter on the other side of Poland and on the other side of Moldova, he has giant mountain ranges and rivers, which would narrow because there's so much plains. You have to have zillions of tanks and zillions of people. But if he can get on the other side, then he's got rivers and mountain ranges, which would funnel NATO down to smaller passes, and he would be able to defend that perimeter with fewer people. This is the theory I've heard. And he thinks that he has to get on the other side before the demographic collapse comes. So that's why the urgency.
What do you
Don't
think,
know.
Minna?
That's an interesting question in terms of like, I mean, the Russian losses in this war have been humongous. Like it boggles the mind. And I'm just wondering to what extent like the automatization, robotics, unmanned systems, to what extent that's going to sort of like change that calculus? Like, is Russia going to in the future still need to rely on this meat grinder strategy, as Andrew called it in the chat? Um,
And as somebody wrote in spray paint in front of my sunflower garden outside the Russian embassy, somebody uh, spray painted Мясорубка, which means meat grinder in Russian.
Part of the
nice, nice.
calculus is, according to said theory, is that Germany is also facing the same conundrum.
So I gotta say, I want to throw some cold water on this theory.
Good. I would love that.
So number one, the Russian demographic collapse is already upon us. Um, the number of men in Russia is, I mean, this is a low birth rate country, um, uh, with uh, a declining population over a relatively protracted period of time. And
And a
uh,
massive territory to cover. Yee.
Exactly. And so, and Russians don't like to talk about this because there is a very deep strain of racism in the country, but an enormous percentage of the country is Muslim, which great Russian nationalists do not think of as real Russians, right? Caucasus peoples, Kazakhs, Uzbeks, ethnic, all kinds all kinds of people that the Russian Muscovite St. Petersburg types think of as, um, uh, the people they colonized, not themselves, although they tend to be Russian speaking at this point. Um, there is also a very large number, as you go out into Siberia, you have a fairly large ethnic population of you know, native Siberian tribes and stuff. And so the number of actual Russians if you look at it from Putin's point of view, is already in very sharp decline. And by the way, a huge number, Putin has protected the great Russians um, uh, from the major casualties of the war. An enormous percentage of the burden of the war is being borne by um, uh, people from what Russia calls the regions, or, which is code for Muslims.
And it
And
doesn't seem like they're in the mood to go pro-immigration anytime soon.
and also, there's not a large number of people who want to emigrate to Russia,
Yeah,
right?
I think that's like
It's not.
actually
I
the
don't.
bigger problem because I just read an article about a new Russian town that has been built as sort of a close community for people that have traditional family values. So an anti-LGBTQI town, and there was some kind of an ad campaign to sort of attract Westerners who share those values.
Right. It's a look, they would take you in a heartbeat. But there just aren't that many people who are looking around the world right now and saying, I really want to emigrate to the Russian Federation. So they've got a demographic problem. Look, who are we to talk? We have solved this problem in a way that neither Europe nor Russia, nor China, nor Japan, nor South Korea has solved this problem. And we correct for it with immigration. Only Canada is, and we just brought our net immigration down to zero. So, like, we are not immune from the insanity that, but we're also not killing huge numbers of our men with a war. Um, I think the best explanation for Putin's aggressiveness is the substance of his speeches over time. If you listen to them, he really believes that, the collapse of the Soviet Union was the greatest political catastrophe of the 20th century. He believes in a big Russia ruled from centrally from Moscow. He believes that all of these Eastern European countries are rightly thought of as part of the near abroad, not as independent countries. He doesn't believe that Ukraine exists. He doesn't believe that Belarus exists. He doesn't believe that Poland should exist. And he believes in the incorporation of the Nordic Baltic countries into the Soviet Union. And he's deeply resentful about the loss of these territories, and he um, and wants to do as much as he can to reestablish Russian hegemony. And I honestly don't think it's much more complicated than that. I don't
Mm.
think he's lying about his motivations, and that there's some secret plan. I think he's, like Trump, weirdly transparent about his goals. Oh, look, it's a wolf.
Puppy! Oh, what a cutie!
Minna, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Like, both of these guys are very transparent about what they want in the world.
I think we may have just lost Minna.
Oh no.
Are you still there?
Yeah,
Oh, were you just being brief or did you get cut off?
I was just being brief.
Ah,
For
very
once.
finished.
Anyway, I will excuse myself for the outro. Thanks for answering the question. Good to see everybody.
Good to see you, Joel.
Yeah.
How's the car coming?
It's coming pretty good. I've been taking time-lapse footage of me building it and posting it on YouTube. If you would like to see me like an ant.
I want to see that. Send it to me.
Okay. Okay, see you guys. Have a good week.
Folks, we're going to be
Bye.
back tomorrow. We're going to be talking all about the subject we didn't talk about today, which is the killing of Charlie Kirk. And I think Holly's going to be here. She says she has a lot to say about it. I'm sure Mike Feinberg, who will have thoughts on the FBI's stellar performance in the investigation so far. Um, and I may have thoughts on it, although I may not. Um, uh, that'll be tomorrow. Between then is today. Enjoy it.